Hello everyone, today we are focusing on Adobe's eventing system called I/O Events. Adobe I/O Events let you subscribe to and process events from Adobe or third-party services. These events are sent as they happen, enabling your applications to react instantly, whether it's sending a notification, processing an order, or products updates. It's a powerful way to connect Adobe tools with your custom solutions and automate processes efficiently. Before we start, let's quickly explain how it works and what we will be doing in this video. Imagine we have a product, tool, or service like an Adobe Commerce instance or a PIM that sends events. These events could be things like an order being placed or a product being updated. From the perspective of Adobe I/O Events, this system acts as the event provider, and each event we want to subscribe to in our integration needs to be registered as event metadata. This metadata includes details like the event code, name, description, and a schema. Once an event is triggered, it needs to be processed. In our case, Adobe I/O Event handles this processing. It decides what to do with the event. For example, it might forward the event to a runtime action that processes it. The whole process is named as event registration, and event registration consists of configuring the event provider, selecting which events to subscribe to based on the available events metadata, and then setting up the event receiver. The event receiver could be a runtime action, webhook, or even Amazon Event Bridge. But no matter which event receiver we use, all events are logged in Adobe's Journal API by default. So from there, they are routed to the appropriate event receiver based on the configuration. Okay, and before we begin, it is also important to understand how to send events to I/O Events. So one option is to use the publish event action, a middleware that includes the Cloud Events library, enabling direct communication with the I/O Events API. And this approach is recommended when event providers cannot fully comply with the I/O Events API. However, if compliance is possible, providers can directly use the endpoints from the I/O Events API. And now that we've covered the basic, let's try it out. In this video, we'll use the publish action provided by the template. We'll register a custom provider, create a sample event, and set up a runtime action to process it. Next, we will trigger the publish action by sending a request through Postman to add a new event to I/O Events. And additionally, I will demonstrate sending a direct request to the I/O Events API and retrieving the data from the Journal API so you can see how to work with it. Alright, so let's start with the publish events action. Here is the boilerplate code that was created by the template. And at the beginning of the file, we can see that we require the Cloud Events library to connect with I/O Events API. And then we have the same basically locker initialization that we saw already in the commerce and generic action. And then we have the validation. And here we also use the same check missing request input function that we saw in previous actions. And here we check if the request contains all the required params and all the required headers. So here the difference is that firstly we require the authorization and the IMS organization ID, and then we also require API key, provider ID, event code, and payload. So API key, this will be configured in the env file, but provider ID and event code will configure it in the app-config.yaml as inputs. And then payload, this will be actually a field in a JSON body that will be sent in our request. And once the validation is passed, we then retrieve the token, organization ID, and initialize the events client here. And basically, once we have the events client, we can create the cloud event. So here is the function to create cloud event. So we are using the cloud event object. We specify the payload. So here is the provider ID. Here is the event code, data content type, payload, and the ID of the event. And then basically the cloud event here is published by using the publish event on the events client, and then there is the whole processing basically depending on the response. So here is the boilerplate code. We do not need to change anything. We just need to make sure that those params are configured and sent in the request. So right now we can actually focus on registration, the provider ID, event metadata, and also the event registration. Okay, and before we start, let's make sure that we are in a correct project and workspace. Also, if you have more organization assigned to your user account, then you also need to verify that your organization is correct. So to do it, we can use the AIO console org select, but I have only one organization, so I won't do it. But then let's use the project select to select the correct project. Here we define, we choose code expect, and then we need to select the workspace. So AIO console workspace select, we choose stage. Once this is done, let's run AIO app use with the option merge to make sure that we have all the necessary tokens variables in our env file. And now we can start the event registration process. So firstly, let's create the provider. So of course we will simulate, we do not have any instance of any PIM Adobe Commerce right now. We are focusing on a sample event provider and event metadata. So like I said, this will be just a sample example to showcase how to work with it, but in the next videos we'll actually see how to work with Adobe Commerce with the IO events. So right now let's go with the AIO event provider create. So this command will create us a new provider, and we need to define label firstly. So this will be, let's say, code expect postman. Add the description about provider, it is optional. URL that contains documentation about the provider, also optional, so let's skip it. And here we have the confirmation, and here is the ID that we need to copy because we will use it for event metadata registration and also for the event registration later. Also, if you are interested in finding more providers that are in your organization, you can actually go and use the AIO event provider list. This will list all the event providers in your organization, and for example here is our one that we created, and here is the ID. So if you, for example, don't remember the ID, you can just simply use it to find the proper ID. And also you can use the AIO event provider get with the ID of a provider to get also the data about the provider, and also there is a command provider delete to actually remove the provider if it's not needed anymore, but of course we will not do it right now. And now we can go and create the event metadata for our provider, and of course again this will be just a sample event, so yeah, let's just go and create it. So again, AIO event and then event metadata create, and then we need to define the provider ID. We select the label for the event metadata, so let's say this will be product sold. Enter the event code that is used as part of the message in a reverse DNS format, so let's say this will become postman product sold. Add a description about the event metadata, so event when product is sold. It will create the event metadata for our provider ID, and here is again the confirmation about it. And basically here we can also use the same options to list, get, delete, and so on. So for example, if we go right now and run list and provide the provider ID here, we'll actually see all the events, like all events metadata that are configured for this particular provider ID. And the last step is to create an event registration, which will combine the event provider that we created, events metadata, and then the event receiver that will process our events. So to do it, we will run the AIO event registration create, and we need to provide path to a file that contains the JSON configuration. So actually, if you run the create without any option, right now we'll see the JSON here that we can put into some file and then specify it. But also I can recommend you to go actually to the Adobe IO Events Registration API. So here is the nice article on how to do it, and here we have actually all the JSON payloads that we can use to create different configurations. So for example, here we can configure the webhook, so we specify the webhook URL, and here we actually configure the runtime action that is configured in our project, and I want to use it actually this payload to configure a runtime action instead of webhook URL on the Amazon event bridge. Alright, so let's just copy this payload from here. Let's go to our web storm, and here let's create a new file, let's say called events.json, and let's paste this here. So the client ID, we actually don't need it because we already have all the necessary tokens inside of the AIO already configured, so we can just remove it. Then we have runtime action. So here our name of action will be code expect, and then let's define that we will use the generic action to process. And of course, here we just return the hello world. So we won't process it, we will just see the hello world in our logs. But yeah, we can just use it. So to do it, we need to run secured generic. So this is the name of our runtime action. Then a user-friendly name. So let's say Postman sync. Description for the registration. Yeah, I don't know, just sample description. Delivery type. This will stay as webhook. And then events of interest. So here we define an array of events and providers that we want to basically configure in this registration. So our provider ID, let's paste it here, and then some event code. So the event code is this one, com postman product sold. So this is what we configured. And now we can save it and we'll run the AIO command. So let's right now go to our terminal. Let's run AIO event registration create and provide the name of the event.json file. We are in the same directory, so this is just a relative path. So let's just run it. No such file or directory event.json. Okay, let me see. Sorry, I made it events.json. Let's rename it event.json. And now it should work. Creating new event registration, and here we have the confirmation with that the event registration is enabled. We have also the events of interest configured with our product sold event with the provider ID and so on. And now we can go to our developer console to see what has changed. So to do it, we can just run AIO console open. So this will open the current project in the developer console. Let's wait until it's open. We are in the stage workspace. So here, firstly, we can see that we have events configured here, and actually here is the events tab with the Postman sync registration, and here is the overview of the registration. So let's wait until it's loaded. So firstly, here is the registration description, the sample description that we configured. Here we can see the runtime action that is run when the event is received. Then we also received the journalic unique API endpoint that will also show you how to work with it. So this is like by default configured for all events registration. Then we have the event providers that we configured. So here we only configured the code expect postman. Here we see the subscribed events that we subscribe to. So if you subscribe more events, you'll also see them here. So we have the product sold with the event provider code expect postman, and then we have also connected credentials from the OAuth server. And also we can see here the debug tracing. So here we will see all the basically events being registered here, and also the event browser. So here we actually connect to the journaling API, so we can browse all the events that were sent to our journal. Right now we do not have any events sent, so it's empty. But yeah, let's go here. And also, so we can work with the AIO CLI, but also we can actually go and, for example, edit this events registration here by simply clicking this button here. And here we can actually edit the registration, right? So we do not have many options here because we have only one event provider, one event metadata, and so on. But if you have more, you can also do it here. So here we define the credentials. We can change the registration name, registration description, and here, as you can see, we can choose the webhook option, runtime action, which is actually right now saying that is configured to the secured generic, and then we have also Amazon event bridge. So we can all configure it here and save configured events if you made any change. So right now, let's just close it and let's go to Postman and let's run our first event. And before we go to Postman and send our first event, we need to actually finalize the configuration of our publish events action. As you remember, we need to define the provider ID API key and event code. So right now we have all of it. So let's go to app.config YAML file, and here to the publish events configuration. We can see that API key is already here defined as a service API key from the env file. So it should be already here defined from, yeah, exactly, here is already set up. So if you do not see it, make sure that you run the AIO app use with the option merge. Once this is done, we need to go and configure the provider ID. And let's go to the event JSON and just copy the event ID from here. And also we need to have the event code. Let's just check. Okay, event code. Let's just copy it. And the event code, let's copy this. All right, that's it. Now let's go to our console, run AIO app dev. This will run all our runtime actions. And we can go to Postman and right now configure the request and send our first event. All right, so let's go. Let's duplicate the commerce request. Let's make it publish events. Okay, make sure that you are in a correct environment. And then we need to change the URL to publish events. Let's just confirm that this is the correct URL, publish events, exactly. So let's go to Postman. We have the headers configured. The authentication is taken from the app builder collection. So then we need to define the payload and payload, right? Because this is also configured here. If you go to index, publish events, the payload is here, right? So we need to define the payload in our body. So let's say this will be new event. Okay, and let's try it out. Let's send 200 status code. Let's see the logs. We can see calling the main action. We have debug events and then publish successfully to IO events, 200 successful requests. Perfect. So we sent our first event. Let's now go to developer console and let's confirm that we can correctly see it. So if we go to debug tracing, let's refresh the list. Exactly. Wow, I'm so excited. So here we have the event code that was sent, event provider, and then all the necessary information. So we have the request headers, request payload. So here is the data that was sent to our processor. And then we have the response 200. And here we see the hello world from generic action. Okay, so that was, I was expecting hello world. I'm not sure why we have the longer version. I remember that I was testing this string in the previous video, but yeah, I'm not sure why, maybe some kind of cache or whatever. But yeah, we configured correctly the generic action, so it was actually passed to the generic action, which was processing the request. So here in the debug tracing, we can actually see the events that were sent, we can see request, we can see response. So this is very helpful. And as a last step, let's go to event browser, because right now we should see this event also here. So journaling API actually has a great article here. If we go to, let's open it. So here is the Adobe I/O Event Journaling API, and here is the explanation of how it works. So this is different than, for example, RabbitMQ, because this is a journal which acts like a ledger or a log where new entries are added to the end of the ledger, and the ledger keeps growing, and then your application can start reading the ledger from any position and then continue reading newer entries in the ledger, much like turning pages forward. So it is a pull model where you decide when you want to consume events. So it's not like webhook when the event provider push it, but you can create an integration that reads the journal and basically process it at our own pace. All right, so let's get back and let's go to the start of our journal. And here is the important information that I forgot to mention, is that events in the journal are stored for 7 days. So you have 7 days for processing the events from the journal, right? So you can, of course, do it at your own pace, but remember that you have only 7 days. So we are at the start of the journal, and here we have all the necessary information about our events. So here, for example, the data, new event that we sent before. And of course, we are at the beginning and there is only one item basically. So if we go to the next batch or if we go to the end, we will see that the API has returned the latest event position in your journal. So here you can use this dashboard to work with your journal if you are interested, but also I will show you how to use the unique API endpoint for our journal. So we'll configure this in Postman so we can also traverse the journal in our Postman application, and also I will show you how to use the direct AIO events API to publish events. So we can do it as I mentioned at the beginning of this video. So we have two options. We can publish events through this runtime action, right? Or any runtime action that works with the Cloud Events library, or we can just simply configure the direct connection in our provider to send events to IO Events API. Alright, so let's copy the unique URL from here. Let's go to Postman. Let's duplicate the publish events, and let's say this will be the journal get. And this is actually a GET request, so let's go and change it here. Let's paste the URL here. And if we go actually to the journaling API documentation to this page, let's see here. Here is the how to get the data from it, right? So we need to have the IMS organization ID, bearer token, and API key. So if we go to Postman, to headers, we have the organization ID already configured here. We have the access token configured here, right? And then we only need to have the API key also as a header, and the API key can be taken from here. So let's just copy the API key and let's paste it here. And okay, let's check the, sorry, I forgot. What is the name? X API key. Okay, let's just configure it here. All right, and we can go to body. Let's remove it. And yeah, maybe let's just send the request here. Missing and associated with your technical account token. All right, we have it here. Okay, let's check if the name is correct. XIMS. Okay, I see there is a different name. So let's just paste it here. So it's okay. So it's a different name than we use in our runtime action. So right now let's send it. And we were able to take the journal items from the unique journal endpoint. So basically we can see the new event here. And of course we can traverse it, but yeah, basically everything is described here. So if you are interested in how to work with it, you can just refer to the article. And right now let's actually use the IO Events API to publish a new event. Okay, and now let's go to the Events Publishing API, where we can see the sample event payload that we can send to actually use this event. So as you can see here, we will use the events ingress Adobe IO URL to pass the events to it. So let's just copy that and we will import it to Postman. Let's go and import it here. Let's just paste it, and collection name, this will be app builder. Import into collection, and yeah, let's change the name. So this will be IO Events API. The URL is here, the post, and then let's go to headers. So API key, we can get it from the journal. So this will be the same. Let's just paste it here. Authorization, we can remove it because, as I mentioned, it is already configured in the collection. Content type, it needs to be Cloud Events plus JSON, and this is actually not needed, so we can remove it. Yeah, let's remove it. And then what we need to have a body. So here, let's beautify it first. Data content type, application JSON, source. So provider ID, let's configure the provider ID. So let's copy it from the event JSON. This is the provider ID. Let's copy it here without the $sign. Event code. So the event code will be this one. Okay, so let's paste it here. Then the event ID. So we can use the random UID from the Postman. So this will be generated by Postman, and then your event JSON payload. So yeah, let's just leave it as here. And actually maybe let's configure this API key in our environment. So it will be, for example, in localhost, right? So let's paste it here, API key, and let's just clear it here. So this will be API key. Okay, I think I haven't saved it. Right now, let's go. API key, okay. API key also is needed here. So basically, yeah, this will be just more clear to work with later. Okay, so if we have this configured, we can try and send the request. All right, and we have but request. I think we need to put it into quotes. Let's see, and let's send it. Yeah, exactly. So this needs to be put into quotes, and then it will work correctly. So we have the 200 status code with the OK response. So now let's go to our developer console to debug tracing. Let's refresh the list. And wow, we have the next event, this time sent directly through AO events to our journal and then to our, of course, runtime action. So if we go to event browser, right, we go to start, this will be the new event. And if we go to the next patch, we will see the your event JSON payload that we just sent. All right, that's all for today. We just scratched the surface, but this should be enough to get you started. In the next videos, we will dive deeper into events and much more. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.